Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with On Lumen sit Corpus nec non. Most decidedly, light is not a body, we are told. Physical sciences say light is a force, a vibration, an undulation of ether. It is the property or quality of matter, or an affection thereof, never a body. Light is matter in motion. That is what light is. It is moving fast, and so we can see it, creating friction as it moves through the plasma, or ether, if you will, and that is why we see light. Just so, for this discovery, the knowledge, whatever it may be worth, that light or caloric is not a motion of material particles. Science is chiefly indebted, if not solely, to Sir W. Grove. We do now know that it is indeed material particles. Once again, we are looking back through the lens of time. This was 1888. It was just after the Civil War, just prior to the First World War. And so science was brand new. I know that's hard to believe these days, but there was a point in time when we had not had the double slit experiment. There was a point in time when we had not even measured light and how fast it moves. We have a better understanding now than we did then, and it is indeed a particle. There is indeed I'm not sure if photon is even the correct terminology anymore, but there is a movement of a particle. It can be in a wave or in a single particle form. The wave means that it's moving through plasma and you're seeing it through time, and the particle means that it is a stasis snapshot. That is the reason for the differential, whether or not science understands that yet. And so light is indeed particles moving. Light has weight. We have measured that. And so she did not have she did not have a correct understanding of science because it simply did not exist yet, right? Just like we saw yesterday where there was some argument about terminology because they had not had an electron microscope to see the actual shape of the atom, and so people were speculating about what it might be. They were doing the same thing with light, and people were like, oh, light's a wave. No, light's a particle. And it wasn't until, 60 years later from this that we actually found out the double slit experiment, where we found out that it is both a wave and a particle for various reasons, but mainly because of your observation. Now, if it is in a wave form, it is moving in space, and if it is in a particle form, it is a snapshot. It is a static picture because light moves in waves. Back to the text. It was he who was the first in a lecture at the London Institution in 1842 to show that light, heat, etc., etc., are affectations of matter itself and not a distinct ethereal, imponderable fluid, a state of matter now permeating it. We have a footnote here on this quote, so I wanted to finish that. Mr. Robert Ward, discussing the questions of heat and light in the November Journal of Science, 1881, shows us how utterly ignorant is science about one of the commonest facts in nature, the heat of the sun. He says, the question of the temperature of the sun has been the subject of investigation with many scientists. Newton, one of the first investigators of this problem, tried to determine it, and after him all the scientists who have been occupied with calorimetry have followed his example. All have believed themselves successful and have formulated their results with great confidence. The following, in the chronological order of the publication of the results, are the temperatures in centigrade degrees found by each of them. Newton, 1,699,300. Poulichet, 1,461 degrees. Tolner, 102,200 degrees. Secchi, 5,344,840 degrees. Ericsson, 2,726,700 degrees. Fizeau, 7,500 degrees. Waterston, 9,000,000 degrees. Sporin, 27,000 degrees. DeVille, 9,500 degrees. Soré, 5,801,846 degrees. Vaccari, 1,500 degrees. Rossetti, 20,000 degrees. The difference is as 1,400 degrees against 9,000,000 degrees, or no less than 8,998,600 degrees. There probably does not exist in science a more astonishing contradiction than that revealed in these figures, and yet, without a doubt, if an occultist were to give out an estimate, each of these gentlemen would vehemently protest in the name of exact science at the rejection of his special result. It is, as far as I am aware, we have not been able to insert a thermometer into the sun, so anything is going to be speculation, even today. We have much more informed speculation today because we have gotten relatively close, and that does not mean close by any means, but much more relatively close than now. We have several telescopes, the GOES 1 and 2, I believe, are monitoring the sun. There's a couple more that every single day you can go and find out exactly what the sun is doing. And they get their readings through electromagnetic spectrum. They get their reading through the thermo imprint given off by the sun and several other variables. And so we have a closer approximation, but once again, anything that you have not actually done the physical putting hands on is going to be speculation, right? Us observing from 1,000,000 miles away, which is not that far cosmically, but is still a great distance away, is not going to give us exact readings. We get really close. We are much closer today than they were in this period of time, but that doesn't mean that we have a full understanding of pretty much anything about the sun. There is still a lot of things that science is actively denying that we have physical proof of, right? The sun drives earthquakes and volcanoes. It drives storm cells. It even drives like blizzards, not just rainstorms, but like it has a fundamental driving force in the planet, in our ecology, in our atmosphere, and in the very ground underneath us. What is going on right now over at Santorini? That's caused by the sun. And people are not going to understand that or realize that because science actively denies it. But there are people who have been actively predicting these things with accuracy for several years now. The Suspicious Observers, they've rebranded, so it's not the same anymore, but they're linked in the resources on my pages, and they came out with an app that could predict earthquakes 4 years ago, and it was based off of the sun. We don't have a full understanding of what our sun even does. So the measurements that we have are giving us a greater understanding, but once again, we have not actually been to the sun and actually stuck a thermometer into it. And I know that's exceedingly difficult to do, right? So we may not ever have an accurate reading of the sun. There are numerous variables between the GOES satellite and the sun that can affect an accurate reading. It is mostly accurate. It is really close, but I will not give it perfect accuracy simply because we have not been physically there. We are reading at a distance, and no matter how good your infrared is, there are still variables that you cannot take into effect if you do not know about them. Back to the text. Yet, perhaps, for some physicists, as for Ørsted, a very eminent scientist, force and forces were tacitly spirit, and hence spirits in nature. What several rather mystical scientists taught was that light, heat, magnetism, electricity, and gravity were not the final causes of the visible phenomena, including planetary motion, but themselves a secondary effect of other causes, for which science in our day cares very little, but in which occultism believes, for the occultists have exhibited proofs of the validity of their claims in every age. And in what age were there no occultists and no adepts? Now, this is what I talk about, right? Light, heat, magnetism, and electricity for sure, but most likely gravity included in that as well, are actually all the exact same variable in different manifestations. Magnetism is more light being held in potential, whereas light that we see is the actual kinetic activation of that potential. Every molecule that surrounds you is held in place by magnetism. Every single piece of carbon, hydrogen, helium, oxygen, every single individual elemental piece in existence is held in place by magnetism. Now, to me, that is the Holy Spirit. Every single one of those atoms, all of them that make up me, all of them between me and you, and all of them that make up you as well. And so all of these things are existing in the plasma that is our reality, right? Every single molecule is actually part of the plasma, which is the Holy Spirit in my estimation. The plasma that's between me and this camera right now that you can see through, that is inactive plasma. The plasma that is in this light right over my head that you really can't see, that is active plasma. But I can make it happen right here. This lighting, that is plasma in action. It is changing the ionic bonds of the butane into carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and the various other variables that come from that butane. It is burning off this and changing into that. That is activated plasma. It is every single light source that you can see is because of activated plasma. It is being activated by electricity or a spark or whatever it is. Fire and lightning are the exact same things in a different manifested form. And so for me, light, heat, magnetism, and electricity, all the same. Now, gravity is probably in that as well because we don't really understand gravity. We understand that there is a force, and we think that it operates in this manner, that it is attracting because of the mass of the planet. It is attracting us down, but that is not necessarily the case. It is entirely possible that it is a plasmic the magnetism from the planet is what is actually pulling you down, but it's not necessarily related to the gravity. We assume that because of measurements that we have made, but we don't know the variables, right? We assume that we do. Well, the Earth is this big, and therefore it is exerting this much pressure. That is not necessarily true. We could be being attracted down by the mass, or we could be being pushed down by the atmospheric pressures. These are things that we do not have a full understanding of or a full grasp of, but it is entirely possible that either way, it is simply the pressure of the plasma that is holding us in place. Now, for space, that plasma gets stretched out. It's not nearly as dense as it is right here, right? We've got 32 millibars of pressure at atmospheric sea level. As you get up, that pressure decreases a little bit. Gravity doesn't really change a whole lot from that, though. Until you break the barrier, then gravity gets a little bit different. And so it is entirely possible that it is a plasmic effect that we just don't understand. I'm not saying that I have the answer on that one. I do believe fully and firmly that light, heat, magnetism, and electricity are the exact same thing in a different manifested form. Gravity is probably, but not definitely, the same thing. Back to the text. Sir Isaac Newton held to the Pythagorean corpuscular theory and was also inclined to admit its consequences, which made the Count de Maistre hope at one time that Newton would ultimately lead science back to the recognition of the fact that forces and the celestial bodies were propelled and guided by intelligences. This is one of those things that is a little bit difficult, right? I believe that there is 7 planes of existence, well, 8, but 7 that we are going to process through. starting with the merely elemental and going up into the angelic and demonic, right? The fifth plane of existence, 5D space, which we navigate. We get length, breadth, width, thought, and time. Those are our 5 dimensions. I believe that there are other beings in the 6th dimension and the 7th dimension. They have a greater understanding of time, and they have a greater understanding of understanding that time. So, I do believe that these things are existent. I don't believe, however, that they are responsible for ensuring that the Earth circles the sun, if that is indeed what is happening, or the moon to orbit the Earth. I don't believe that there is some elemental sitting up there holding the moon and just guiding it around the Earth. I don't believe that at all. I believe that these elementals are there, that they have some function that we probably do not fully understand, but I don't believe that they are responsible for gravity. I don't. I could be wrong. Right? This is all speculation, but I don't believe that they are propelling or guiding literally anything. I believe that they are existent, that they serve a purpose that we do not fully comprehend, but as I do not have a whole lot of experience with them, I do have some minor experience, but not a whole lot of intentional experience with any of them. I cannot speak on it with too much authority. It is entirely possible that I am being guided around by some elemental that I don't see that points me in the direction, but I don't think so. I think that free will plays a very large part, and if somebody is holding you and guiding you, then it is not free will. It is the same for all of the planes of existence, and so therefore, I don't believe that it is doing what is being described here. But again, I could be wrong. Back to the text. But Demosthenes counted without his host. The innermost thoughts and ideas of Newton were perverted, and of his greatest mathematical learning, only the mere physical husk was turned to account. Had poor Sir Isaac foreseen to what use his successors and followers would apply his gravity. Let's go ahead and check that footnote. According to one atheistic idealist, Dr. Lewins, when Sir Isaac in 1687 showed mass and atoms acted upon by innate activity, he effectually disposed of spirit, anima, or divinity as supererogatory. And see, I don't necessarily agree with that, simply because free will is spirit in motion, right? You making decisions is the spirit. You're making the decisions and the spirit is enacting it. And so it is not disposing of, it is giving control of to the actual slice of divinity, which is you, right? We didn't hit the Trinity, but the body is one part of the Trinity. It is the temple of God. It is the 5D navigational device that you are given to incorporate here on this 5D plane. The soul is the individualized slice of divinity, the spark that is you, that makes the decisions for the temple. But you making the decisions doesn't make it happen. That is actually the Holy Spirit in action. What happens is you make a decision, I'm going to wiggle my fingers, and then an electrical signal shoots down and goes out to your arm, and that makes your fingers wiggle. That electrical signal, that is the spirit in motion. You are directing the spirit to wiggle your fingers. So I don't believe that he disposed of spirit or anima at all. Had poor Sir Isaac foreseen to what use his successors and followers would apply his gravity, that pious and religious man would surely have quietly eaten his apple, and never breathed a word about any mechanical ideas connected with its fall. That is an assumption. Great contempt is shown for metaphysics generally, and for ontological metaphysics especially. But we see, whenever the occultists are bold enough to raise their diminished heads, that materialistic physical science is honeycombed with metaphysics. Let's pop out that footnote too. Stylo's above-cited work, Concepts of Modern Physics, a volume which has called forth the liveliest protest and criticisms, is recommended to anyone inclined to doubt this statement. The professed antagonism of science to metaphysics, he writes, has led the majority of scientific specialists to assume that the methods and results of empirical research are wholly independent of the control of the laws of thought. They either silently ignore or openly repudiate the simplest canons of logic, including the laws of non-contradiction, and resent with the utmost vehemence every application of the rule of consistency to their hypotheses and theories, and they regard an examination of these in the light of these laws as an impertinent intrusion into a priori principles and methods, into the domains of empirical science. Persons of this cast of mind find no difficulty in holding that atoms are absolutely inert, and at the same time asserting that these atoms are perfectly elastic, or in maintaining that the physical universe, in its last analysis, resolves itself into dead matter and motion, and yet denying that all physical energy is in reality kinetic, or in proclaiming that all phenomenal differences in the objective world are ultimately due to the various motions of absolutely simple material units, and nevertheless repudiating the proposition that these units are equal. The blindness of eminent physicists to some of the most obvious consequences of their own theories is marvelous. When Professor Tate, in conjunction with Professor Stewart, announces that matter is simply passive, The Unseen Universe, section 104, and then, in connection with Sir W. Thomson, declares that matter has an innate power of resisting external influences, Treatise on Natural Philosophy, volume 1, section 216. It is hardly impertinent to inquire how these statements are to be reconciled. When Professor Dubois-Reymond insists upon the necessity of reducing all the processes of nature to motions of a substantial, indifferent substratum, wholly destitute of quality, über die Grenzen des Naturerkennens, page 5, having declared shortly before in the same lecture that resolution of all changes in the material world into motions of atoms caused by their constant central forces would be the completion of natural science, we are in perplexity from which we have to be relieved. Physical science is honeycombed with metaphysics, that its most fundamental principles, while inseparably wedded to transcendentalism, are, nevertheless, in order to show modern science divorced from such dreams, tortured, and often ignored in the maze of contradictory theories and hypotheses. A very good corroboration of this charge lies in the fact that science finds itself absolutely compelled to accept the hypothetical ether and try to explain it on the materialistic grounds of atomo-mechanical laws. This attempt has led directly to the most fatal discrepancies and radical inconsistencies between the assumed nature of ether and its physical actions. A second proof is found in the many contradictory statements about the atom, the most metaphysical object in creation. And once again, they did not have a firm understanding of any of this science. They were working it out, and so the inconsistencies are explained by the fact that they were experimenting and trying to understand. You formulate a hypothesis, whether it is true or not, comes from testing, right? You either prove it to be untrue or you continue testing even. And so they did not have nearly a good understanding of any of this at this time. Now, what does modern science know? What does the modern science of physics know of ether? The first concept of which belongs undeniably to ancient philosophers, the Greeks having borrowed it from the Aryans, and the origin of modern ether being found in and disfigured from akasa. This disfigurement is claimed to be a modification and refinement of the idea of Lucretius. Let us then examine the modern concept from several scientific volumes containing the admissions of the physicists themselves. The existence of ether is accepted by physical astronomy, in ordinary physics, and in chemistry. Astronomers, who first began by regarding it as a fluid of extreme tenuity and mobility, offering no sensible resistance to the motions of celestial bodies, never gave a thought to its continuity or discontinuity. Its main function in modern astronomy has been to serve as a basis for hydrodynamical theories of gravitation. In physics, this fluid appeared for some time in several roles in connection with the imponderables, so cruelly put to death by Sir W. Grove. Some physicists have even identified the ether of space with those imponderables. Then came their kinetic theories, and from the date of the dynamical theory of heat, it was chosen in optics as a substratum for luminous undulations. Then, in order to explain the dispersion and polarization of light, physicists had to resort once more to their scientific imagination, and forthwith endowed the ether with A. atomic or molecular structure, and B. with an enormous elasticity. That is true, both of those. It has an atomic molecular structure, and it is enormously elastic. So that it's like you can move your hand through it and it moves around your hand. That is literally the ether, right? Everything in existence, all of the atmosphere that we navigate through every single day is the ether. And so, like, it's in different, like the earth that we walk upon is also the ether. There are different levels of condensation of the ether, but it is still the ether. And so it is remarkably plastic in many ways. Sometimes it is rigid, and even then, when you break apart a rock, it doesn't just disappear, it changes form. That is plasticity, elasticity to a certain degree, right? It's literally breaking apart, so that's not plastic, but it is able to be reshaped and remolded. That is. And so, especially like clay, right? If you are unaware, clay has heavy plasticity, which I used to run a soils lab, and we did this thing called an Atterberg. And what that is you take a sample of soil and you add water to it, and you find out where the plastic limit of it is and where it begins falling apart. And clay is extremely elastic, even though it is rather solid when it is dry. That is the same type of thing I'm talking about. Right? It's not plastic in that it holds its shape regardless, but that it can be moved and molded. This necessitated the theory of the essential discontinuity of matter, hence of ether. After having accepted this discontinuity in order to account for dispersion and polarization, theoretical impossibilities were discovered with regard to such dispersions. Cauchy's scientific imagination saw in atoms material points without extension, and he proposed, in order to obviate the most formidable obstacles in the undulatory theory, namely some well-known mechanical theorems which stood in the way, to assume that the ethereal medium of propagation, instead of being continuous, should consist of particles separated by sensible distances. Fresnel rendered the same service to the phenomena of polarization. That's because they're the same thing. E.B. Hunt upset the theories of both. Silliman's Journal. There are now men of science who proclaim them materially fallacious, while others, the atomo-mechanicalists, cling to them with desperate tenacity. That is because that is actually true. The supposition of an atomic or molecular constitution of ether is upset, moreover, by thermodynamics, for Clerk Maxwell showed that such a medium would be simply gas. No, he didn't. See Clerk Maxwell's treatise on electricity and magnetism and compare with Cauchy's Memoire sur la dispersion de la lumière. All right, so there are different states of matter, right? Water passes through three of them: solid, liquid, gas. That is simply differentiations between pressure and temperature. The Saying that this is upset that the medium would be simply gas is in part correct, but also in part incorrect, right? There are individual elements floating around you. They are not solid. You can walk through them. You create friction when you walk through them. You change some of the ions when you just pass through it. Not many of them, or you would glow when you moved. But you do create a small amount of friction with the air around you. That, in part, is the gasification of these elements. But the solidity of this glass is relative to temperature and pressure. If I heated this up enough, it would become a gas. And so this is true, but it is a not full understanding of what is actually going on. Relative pressure and temperature plays a part in every single atom in existence. It is the reason why in space they are so strung out. They are stretched to a great degree. And here they are compressed in places. You walk upon compressed elements. You breathe in slightly less compressed elements. You drink slightly more compressed elements than the atmosphere. But it's the same elements. There is still oxygen and hydrogen in the water you drink or the air you breathe. It is a variation of temperature and pressure. And so such a medium would in part be gas, but it is also in part solids too. The hypothesis of finite intervals is thus proven of no avail as a supplement to the undulatory theory. Besides, eclipses fail to reveal any such variation of color as supposed by Cauchy on the assumption that the chromatic rays are propagated with different velocities. There is a lot to unpack in that particular statement, and we are not going to. Just because you cannot measure a thing does not mean that a thing doesn't happen, right? And there are definitely going to be color variations associated with an eclipse. Right, as the sun is moving across, there will be a warping, there will be a distortion. But because of the distances that we are talking about, the measurement of those is going to be difficult. Just to put it shortly. Astronomy has pointed out more than one phenomena absolutely at variance with this doctrine. Thus, while in one department of physics the atomomolecular constitution of the ether is accepted in order to account for one set of special phenomena, in another department such a constitution is found quite subversive of a number of well-ascertained facts. Herne's charges being thus justified, vide supra, chemistry deemed it impossible to concede enormous elasticity to the ether without depriving it of other properties, upon the assumption of which the construction of its modern theories depended. This ended in a final transformation of ether. The exigencies of the atomomechanical theory have led distinguished mathematicians and physicists to attempt to substitute for the traditional atoms of matter peculiar forms of vortical motion in a universal, homogeneous, incompressible, and continuous material medium, or ether. The present writer, claiming no great scientific education but only a tolerable acquaintance with modern theories, and a better one with occult sciences, picks up weapons against the detractors of the esoteric teaching in the very arsenal of modern science. The glaring contradictions, the mutually destructive hypotheses of world-renowned scientists, their mutual accusations, denunciations, and disputes, show plainly that, whether accepted or not, the occult theories have as much right to a hearing as any of the so-called learned and academical hypotheses. Thus, whether the followers of the Royal Society choose to accept ether as a continuous or a discontinuous fluid matters little and is indifferent to the present purpose. It simply points to one certainty. Official science knows nothing to this day of the constitution of ether. Let science call it matter if it likes, only neither as a casa nor as the one sacred ether of the Greeks. It is to be found in any of the states of matter known to modern physics. That is not true, right? That is not true today. It wasn't true then, but they didn't have the ability to measure it. But we can indeed measure the movement of the individual atoms through the process of an electron microscope. And so we have seen that it is found in other states of matter, right? The movement is still there no matter how hard, right? Like these dog toenail clippers, that's what this is. This is metal. It's made out of stainless steel. It is rather hard. Every single atom inside of this is moving. Every single one of them. And so that is in part disproving what she is saying here, right? It is to be found in any of the, neither Akasa or the one sacred ether is to be found in any of the states of matter known to modern physics is simply untrue. It is matter on quite another plane of perception and being, and can neither be analyzed by scientific apparatus, appreciated, nor even conceived by scientific imagination, unless the professors thereof study the occult sciences. That which follows proves this statement. And again, the discovery of the electron microscope has allowed us to do this. It is clearly demonstrated by Stallo as regards the crucial problems of modern physics, as was done by de Quatrefages and several others of those in anthropology, biology, etc., that, in their efforts to support their individual hypotheses and systems, the majority of the eminent and learned materialists very often utter the greatest fallacies. Let us take the following case. Most of them reject actio in distance, one of the fundamental principles in the question of ether or akasa in occultism, while, as Stallo justly observes, there is no physical action which, on close examination, does not resolve itself into actio in distance, and he proves it. Now, metaphysical arguments, according to Professor Lodge, Nature, are unconscious appeals to experience, and he adds that if such an experience is not conceivable, then it does not exist. In his own words, if a highly developed mind or set of minds find a doctrine about some comparatively simple and fundamental matter absolutely unthinkable, it is an evidence that the unthinkable state of things has no existence. I don't know that I agree with that. And thereupon, towards the end of his lecture, Professor Lodge indicates that the explanation of cohesion, as well as of gravity, is to be looked for in the vortex atom theory of Sir William Thomson. I'm not familiar with a lot of these references, and so I cannot expound upon them, right? I don't know what Sir William Thomson's theory was, right? Vortex atom sounds like it's actually going to be correct, right? A vortex is a swirling. Atoms is the individualized piece of the element. And yes, there is swirling around the individualized piece of the element in a prescribed manner. Like we know in which direction it's going to move. We know at what speed it's going to move, unless we play with the variables. And so, in part, this is probably a close to true supposition that Mr. Thomson was making, but I'm not familiar enough to talk about it. It is needless to stop to inquire whether it is to this vortex theory also that we have to look for the dropping down on Earth of the first life germ by a passing meteor or comet, Sir W. Thomson's hypotheses. That is possible, but probably not likely. All right, we have meteors hit often, not all the time, but often, and it is possible that they contain a germ of life. But for a meteor to pass through our atmosphere and life survive that is highly improbable, right? The atmosphere is going to create friction as this meteor penetrates through. It is going to flare up. That is what we see when it happens, right? The chemical changing actually happening. That's light. And we see it happen, but the temperatures that are created by this are not beneficial to life, to say the least. And so, in order for this to have happened, what is going to have to be is that the interior of the asteroid holds the life, and that the outer shell is burned away, but the interior holds the life intact until it hits the ground and cracks open, and then the life escapes. That is extremely difficult. That is almost certainly not what happened. Right? We can't say that it's not. We cannot say firmly and fully, no, that didn't happen. But there are logical reasons to assume that it did not. But again, at this point in time, they didn't know about the resistance of the atmosphere. They didn't know about re-entry and how difficult of a problem that was. They didn't really understand even what was happening when we saw the light hit the comet or the asteroid or whatever it happens to be. So they made speculations. That is perfectly fine. You just have to be able to adjust your speculations in the face of actual evidence. But Mr. Lodge might be reminded of the wise criticism on his lecture in the same Concepts of Modern Physics. Noticing the above quoted declaration by the London professor, the author asks whether the elements of the vortex theory are familiar or even possible facts of experience. For, if they are not, clearly that theory is obnoxious to the same criticism which is said to invalidate the assumption of actio in distance. And then the able critic shows clearly what the ether is not, nor can ever be, notwithstanding all scientific claims to the contrary. And thus, he opens widely, if unconsciously, the entrance door to our occult teachings. For, as he says, the medium in which the vortex movements arise is, according to Professor Lodge's own express statement, a perfectly homogeneous, incompressible, continuous body, incapable of being resolved into simple elements or atoms. That is untrue. It is, in fact, continuous, not molecular. Then again, untrue. And after making this statement, Professor Lodge adds, there is no other body of which we can say this, and hence the properties of the ether must be somewhat different from those of ordinary matter. Again, not true. It appears then that the whole vortex atom theory, which is offered to us as a substitute for the metaphysical theory of actio in distance, rests upon the hypothesis of the existence of a material medium which is utterly unknown to experience, and which has properties somewhat different from those of ordinary matter. We have a footnote on different. Somewhat different, exclaims Tallow. The real import of this is that the medium in question is not, in any intelligible sense, material at all, having none of the properties of matter. Wrong. All the properties of matter depend upon differences and changes, and the hypothetical ether here defined is not only destitute of differences, but incapable of difference and change, in the physical sense, let us add. Again, wrong. This proves that if ether is matter, it is so only as something visible, tangible, and existing, for spiritual senses alone, and that it is a being indeed, but not of our plane, pater ether or akasa, and that is, again, simply not right. Again, this is one of those things that we cannot be definite about, but I can be pretty close. Because I manipulate the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the ether or the plasma or the Holy Spirit, whichever way of referring to it you are comfortable with. They are all exactly the same thing to me. I have not, as of yet, been able to spontaneously create light. I have seen it happen, but I have not done it. And so I don't talk about that, but I have affected healing within myself, and I have affected the weather on at least one occasion. And so I do have a little bit of authority when I'm talking about this. It is not something that I'm just merely pulling out of my yang or something that I read about. It is something I have some experience with. And so when I talk about the moving of the elements and the change that happens, it is because of the experience that I've had. Now, some of it is supposition, right? I have seen somebody create a light bulb. That is something that I have witnessed, even though I cannot reproduce it. It was similar to creating plasma. Well, I dropped my lighter. I'm not going to grab it. But, wait, I got another one. It is similar to this. It is similar to flipping a switch for electricity. It is similar to a lightning bolt striking. When any of those happen, it is literally changing. So it is not incapable of difference and change. Now, this is a logical proof that I am working through. This is my own hypotheses, and I don't even have the experimentation to go into the detail that it would take to disprove or prove it. It is merely something that I suppose, but it is something that is logically consistent. I have spent a great deal of time on that. And so when I talk about it, I'm not just pulling it out of my ass. And which has properties somewhat different from those of ordinary matter. Hence is this theory, instead of being, as is claimed, a reduction of an unfamiliar fact of experience to a familiar fact, is, on the contrary, a reduction of a fact which is perfectly familiar to a fact which is not only unfamiliar but wholly unknown, unobserved and unobservable. Again, untrue. Furthermore, the alleged vortical motion of, or rather in, the assumed ethereal medium is impossible, because motion in a perfectly homogeneous, incompressible, and therefore continuous fluid is not sensible motion. And that's your problem, right? You are assuming some things. You are assuming that it is homogeneous. It's not. It is made up of many different elemental things, right? The air around you, the atmosphere that you breathe, has oxygen, but it also has nitrogen and helium and hydrogen and carbon and zinc, right? All of the elements are contained in the atmosphere, and it is indeed compressible. And therefore, it is not a continuous fluid. It is a fluid, right? The atmosphere around you, we classify it as gas, but that is a designation relative to temperature and pressure. If you compress it enough, the air around you will liquefy. We sell liquefied hydrogen and helium and oxygen all of the time. We can take those elements out of the atmosphere. We can compress them. It is not therefore a continuous fluid. It is still part of the makeup of everything. However, even if you take it from the atmosphere and you put it into a lighter, butane is still butane. It is manifest, therefore, that wherever the vortex atom theory may lead us, it certainly does not lead us anywhere in the region of physics, wrong, or in the domain of vers et vere causae. Footnote. Vere causae for physical science, or Mayavic or illusionary causes to the occultist, and vice versa. And I may add that, inasmuch as the hypothetical undifferentiated, footnote 2, very much differentiated on the contrary, since the day it left its laya condition. An undifferentiable medium is clearly an involuntary reification of the old ontological concept of pure being. The theory under discussion has all the attributes of an inapprehensible metaphysical phantom. A phantom, indeed, which can be made apprehensible only by occultism. And again, wrong. From such scientific metaphysics to occultism, there is hardly one step. Those physicists who hold the view that the atomic constitution of matter is consistent with its penetrability need not go far out of their way to be able to account for the greatest phenomena of occultism, now so derided by physical scientists and materialists. Cauchy's material points without extension are Leibniz's monads, and at the same time the materials out of which the gods and other invisible powers clothe themselves in bodies. Vide infra, gods, monads, and atoms. The disintegration and reintegration of material particles without extension as a chief factor in phenomenal manifestations ought to suggest themselves very easily as a clear possibility, at any rate, to those few scientific minds which accept Mr. Cauchy's views. For, disposing of that property of matter which they call impenetrability, by simply regarding the atoms as material points exerting on each other attractions and repulsions which vary with the distances that separate them. That is true. The French theorist explains that. From this it follows that, if it please the author of nature, footnote 3, for the occultists who say that the author of nature is nature itself, something indistinct and inseparable from the deity, it follows that those who are conversant with the occult laws of nature and know how to change and provoke new conditions in ether may not modify the laws, but work and do the same in accordance with those immutable laws. If it please the author of nature simply to modify the laws according to which the atoms attract or repel each other, we might instantly see the hardest bodies penetrating each other. The smallest particles of matter occupying immense spaces, or the largest masses reducing themselves to the smallest volumes. Yes, the entire universe concentrating itself, as it were, into a single point. And that point, invisible on our plane of perception of matter, is quite visible to the eye of the adept who can follow and see it present on other planes. And that is going to bring us to the end of On Lumen sit Corpus nec non. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. Our understanding of this topic is still evolving, right? We are still experimenting in the realm of plasma. We are still getting an understanding of exactly what it is, but my understanding of it is that it is the web that makes up everything. It is literally every single atom in existence, every single element in its prime state and in its combined state. Everything that is, was, or ever shall be is indeed part of plasma. Now, we have active plasma, that's the part you can see, and we have inactive plasma, that's the part you can't. Inactive plasma is the atmosphere, and activating that plasma through a static charge from a cloud to the ground or from the ground to the cloud, which it happens both ways if you are unaware, enacts a change in that atmosphere. What you are seeing from that release of the ionic bonds is light. We get sound from that because there is motion. Motion creates sound. The motion of my air passing through my vocal cords creates what you hear. The motion of me hitting this table is what you hear. You hear the effect of the motion. That is the sound. The light is the chemical change happening. That is what we see. It is still plasma. It is carried, right? The photons that escape from the light are carried in between the individualized pieces of the plasma. The individual carbon, hydrogen, helium. It glides around and over those. That's why it undulates. These things make sense if you spend the time to think about them, but again, it is purely speculation, and I am not a scientist. I'm just somebody who enjoys science. Right? I'm not a historian. I'm just somebody who enjoys history. I'm not going to school to learn these things. I'm learning these things because I enjoy them. I speculate upon them not to make a check, but to figure out how things work. That is why I do it. Now, I do it for me, and then I give it away freely to the internet. That's kind of how I work. Other people work in different ways. But hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion. Hopefully this was clear, and if it wasn't, let me know. If you like what I'm doing, let me know. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there's another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks, because it will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me. I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pip's Take. Peace.